Okay. Is everybody okay if I record this? Good stuff. All right, fantastic. Welcome everybody to this installment of Agenda Dad, where we'll be talking about some of the mechanisms for um, relocating elements of the birth registration process from a central office, a registry office, into the family hubs. And it's fantastic to have Heather Barnes here, Integrative Service Manager for Hull City Council, and I'm sure that Heather will go into that title a little bit more. But just to set the scene around birth registration, as I did last week, but I won't go into all the data necessarily, just to paint an overall picture of what seems to be happening. So from data analysis, it looks like there are many more births happening outside of marriage or birth registration. Um, and yet, even though there are more births happening outside of those institutions, the phenomenon of sole registrant birth registrations, where there's only mother on the birth certificate, has fallen precipitously over the past 37 years, such to the point that in 2021, only 4.6% of all births had only the mother on the birth certificate. So perhaps there is a space for looking at this policy around birth registration where mother has de facto parental responsibility and noticing that social norms have changed and are continuing to change, and yet that people are kind of inverted commas doing the right thing by ensuring that both parents are represented on the birth certificate. So maybe this is an opportunity to review this policy. So with that scene set, welcome, Heather. It's great to have you here on Agenda Dad. So if I will leave this over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks ever so much for it's been really interesting delving into these conversations and when we met before. And it's made me delve a lot more into the information and the data and think about how we're collecting data as well a bit better. I was going to start with just a bit of a background. So I've got a presentation, if that's all right, just some of the wider information. Now I have we don't normally use
So if you go to slideshow up at the
I
top,
can't see it because there we go. I couldn't see it because
and then there should from beginning or from current slide, whichever.
not showing the whole screen. Is that right?
I also see next slides and notes. So perhaps if I think it's the one next to the inspector glass. Yeah, is that right? Perhaps not. Otherwise, it might be possible to display settings or even end slideshow and then start presentation from beginning. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, explain what my job title is. What that means really is my role is to oversee the family hubs across the city, and I also lead on the north of the city for a whole range of processes that really around referrals and our relationships with partners, hence where the integrated bit comes in, and social care and looking at the step ups and step down processes between ourselves and social care. So kind of my roles kind of split but merged really, and obviously with the Family Hub Start for Life funding, there's been a lot of my role for the last couple of years has been focused on how we're rolling out that programme and using that funding. So just a bit of information around the big picture of the city. Some of you may know this, some of this information. Hull is the fourth most deprived local authority, with 38% of children and young people living in income deprived households. It's a really compact city, so that means that the boundaries between ourselves and East Riding are really tight, which has an impact on our services and support, which I'll talk a bit more about. And you can see there the numbers of children within the city, and the percentage of that, 22% of the city's population is not 17-year-olds, mainly white British, across the city, but that is changing. Lower than national levels of good level development for children through schools, and lower breastfeeding rates. So obviously some of these figures are some of the national markers of how we look at our data. However, that has hugely improved. So the 6 to 8 week breastfeeding rate is a key point that we measure infant breastfeeding. And at the moment we're at 45%, and that is the highest it's ever been, and that is directly linked to the Family Hub Start for Life funding, because we employed 4 paid breastfeeding peer supporters. This time last year, or a bit before then, probably about 15 months ago, that was at 34%. So we've gone up 11% over a year, which has been huge for the city, and obviously we understand the long-term impact of that. Higher than national levels of obesity, and the numbers of free school meals. So the impact of the cost of living crisis has really hit Hull, really badly hit Hull. And there has been an increase of 563 children going on to free school meals in less than 6 months. So, massive levels of poverty in the city, which are everybody's, there's been like emergency task and finish groups to deal with it, etc. So lots and lots of work going on across the city to support that. Slide. Just briefly about early help services. That map in the background is we call it our blockbuster diagram, but it's through the Supporting Families programme, looking at that network of support across the city, and how they're all work together as part of that early help partnership. We have 12 family hubs across the city, a whole range of youth services, youth development service, refreshed drug and alcohol service for children and young people, and obviously we have a renew alcohol support service for adults as well. And targeted youth support, do a lot of work with vulnerable, exploited, missing young people, a lot of homelessness support, etc. And we have a health and wellbeing team. So these all sit under the early help services. And the Healthy Holidays programme, a really big Healthy Holidays programme across the city. Thrive is the young people's mental health and wellbeing network across the city. As I said, a lot of work going on around child poverty, and the Healthy Lifestyles team. And obviously the whole youth justice service as well sits underneath the early help team as well. And then the early help strategy, I won't read all through those, but these are partnership priorities that we did a lot of work together to ensure that the whole partnership across the city, this isn't just internal early help services in the council, it's around that whole level of support across Hull.
Heather, can I just pause you there for a moment? Could you go back for a second? Because one thing that I note when I see these, or a question that I have, is in the keeping children safe and supporting successful transitions. Where does the sorry? Right. And where I can see reducing parental conflict, and obviously I understand the agenda for the family hubs. Where do you see, or where does your team practice positive parenting, and also kind of the support for parents around their mental health, and I also hasten to broaden out the concept of mental health so that it's not just a psychological framing but also a social framing, because as your statistics pointed out, the degree of challenge through deprivation and the vagaries of inflation and cost of living, it seems like this has been a really significant hit to many people in Hull.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few questions with that, isn't there? And the reducing parental conflicts, we work together across the whole Yorkshire and Humber area. We've been part of and contributed towards a website which is relationshipsmatter.org.uk, and All the staff are trained in the Reducing Parental Conflict toolkit, and we try and measure that through how we record on our system, but a whole range of really useful tools just to start those conversations with parents around, you're having a child. It is one of the biggest triggers for parental conflict and domestic abuse. However, there is a huge difference between parental conflict and domestic abuse. It's not necessarily on a continuum, but just enabling and supporting the staff to support families to actually think about it and how they can support themselves, that wider family network support, just raising it as a conversation that actually there's lots of support out there to enable you to communicate more effectively within your family network to stop this and reduce the parental conflict and the impact on that on children's development and brain development. So it has been, because we started rolling out that reducing parental conflict training before COVID, and then obviously everything stopped during COVID. So getting that back up and running and getting the partnership on board has been one of the biggest challenges to do that, but we're getting there. We're like dogs with the bones of how we're really pushing. We've got it on the whole safeguarding partnerships training program. We raise it at every opportunity that we can do, hold partners accountable if they're not accessing the training. There's a huge issue with domestic abuse in Hull, massive issue with domestic abuse. So at the moment, there's an independent review going on of the work that's happening across the city and why it's not reducing, and what we need to do better at that. And we're waiting for the outcome of that. But again, all the staff are trained. I think often it's around having those conversations. And one of my little bugbears is that alcohol use is dealt with within some of those really targeted specialist teams, but I think alcohol use as a whole population isn't spoken about and isn't dealt with, even raised. There are lots around loads of conversations and support around domestic abuse, but actually that whole wider picture as well is important, isn't it? And I think a lot of those conversations around parental relationships are now threaded through, since we've had the funding for the Family Hub Start for Life and that infant mental health agenda, attachment and bonding. A lot of those conversations are threaded through that training and work around attachment and bonding and being trauma informed. And so I think it's becoming now threaded through a lot of the work we're doing across. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, completely. No, thank you. And I didn't mean to take you off course from
No, not at all. But no, because it's important and it's all linked, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, just a bit of background really about those internal early help services. Got the 12 family hubs across the city. We did have 8, and with the family hubs funding, we've an element of that funding is around regenerating capital builds. So we've been able to open up a bit wider. We had some that were just really small satellite sites and we didn't really particularly use much, so we've reopened those up, refreshed, redecorated, new signage, etc. A big focus around the first 1,001 days, all that attachment and bonding work I talked about. We have a range of different targeted family support teams that use the Family Star and the assessment and the plan, and the 0 to 19 teams, 11 to 19. We have targeted pregnancy support teams, so lots of work happening really early on around that vulnerable pregnancy pathway. A lot of work there that happens with quite often young vulnerable parents. We have a SEND family support team, and then we would underpin that with a whole range of evidence-based interventions, and there's a list there of some of the parenting courses. Well, we don't like using the word course, but sessions and support that we offer families. And I suppose they're graduated. It's almost like a graduated response. So that's Solihull online guides are self-accessible for families, through to some of the really intense support. Strengthening families, strengthening communities is kind of more at that higher end. The Grow Brain is around that infant mental health, attachment bonding work. a lot of focus around that early years support. PEEP is the home learning package that we've commissioned under the Family Hub Start for Life funding, and the whole working really closely with the speech and language team. Huge issue as there is nationally around speech and language challenges since COVID. We have the Healthy Holidays activities. We use a whole range of toolkits, for example, the NSPCC Look, Say, Sing, Play activities. And just a few of the partners that we have co-located within the family hubs and work really closely with. So, for example, midwifery, all their antenatal appointments for midwifery are held in the family hubs, apart from if women were having consultant-led care and then they would go to Hull Women and Children's Hospital. All the child health clinics, I think apart from one, are delivered. The health visiting child health clinics, they're all delivered through the family hubs. Work closely with perinatal mental health team, work really closely with schools, the police, domestic abuse partnership, Department of Work and Pensions. So that whole, breadth of partnership that we had on that previous blockbuster map.
I'm just going to mute Owen there.
Yeah, so really trying to embed that whole partnership approach and offer through the family hubs. So birth registrars, I suppose a bit winding back to COVID, and actually when I was thinking about this as I was driving to work this morning, I was thinking if we wound back probably about 6 or 7 years, even further back, we had approached at that point the registrar service in the council and started those tried to start those conversations at that point around co-locating the registrars then, and we couldn't get anywhere with it. They weren't interested and wouldn't engage with us around it. And then COVID hit and the family hubs stayed open. Well, there were children's centres at that point, but children's centres stayed open across Hull, and we were one of the only public-facing buildings left in the city, left open. And obviously the birth registration service ceased for a few months as well, so then they had a big backlog. And I think it got to the point where they had this backlog and then the birth registry, and then we'd been having strategic conversations, and it was, I think, strategic leaders were fully aware that all the family hubs were staying open. And then they came to us and asked if they could start delivering some of the birth registration sessions through the hubs, or through the centres. So we initially set it up in 4 of the hubs in different areas of the city, a good spread across the northeast and the west of Hull. And this, if we're bearing in mind, this was right at the height of, I suppose, if we think back to the days of the chaos of when COVID was starting, to increase, and the practicalities of things like the risk assessments, safe ways of working, trying to get all the PPE, it was a pretty chaotic time in I'm sure the whole world, but in the public sector it felt like we were all wading through the dark trying to work out all our risk assessments. So in 2 of the hubs, the registrars, there was issues. Obviously we had the screens up around the desk. I mean, my office was commandeered. They took my office off me where I'm sat now, when they used a screw and moved all the desks around and put screens up, and they weren't happy because the 2-meter gap between other people still wasn't quite 2 meters. So the registrars refused to work from this building. We've had it running for a few weeks. So 2 of the centres, big challenges with 2 of the centres. It was fine, and we managed to get through all that work. And then as soon as the restrictions are lifted, they picked up all the folders and moved back into the Wilson Centre, which is the office in the middle of Hull. And where it is in Hull is a really difficult place to park. A really obviously busy. Everything's in there, everything from housing to that central public-facing council building. And a lot of the other council buildings across Hull over the years, with the cuts, have closed down. So places like libraries, etc., a lot of them have been closed over the years. So it is one of the main council offices, so very, very busy. Then we heard that we're getting the Family Hub Start for Life funding, and within, I don't know if people have read that guidance, but within that guidance it is noted within the guidance that they would want to see registration services within the hubs. So that gave us the leverage to restart those conversations with the head of that team, and she was quite open to it, quite happy with it. And I think because we've done everything so rapidly the first time, this gave us an opportunity to do it in a lot more structured, organised, methodical way, really. Last time it felt at the time all, as I said, it was, the times were chaotic, weren't they? But then we had lots of issues that we had to unpick. Some of the things that really interestingly became huge barriers, and we had to spend an awful lot of time sorting out. So we all have the Follow Me printers, so one big printer in each building, which anybody in the council, I can walk into any council building and log into a Follow Me printer. And we couldn't use those printers, so we had to buy a dedicated printer for every separate dedicated printer for each building. And then just even the linking that up to our systems became exceedingly long-winded. Obviously, all the issues around the confidentiality, the paperwork, we had to have a dedicated safe. Previously, throughout COVID, they used our safes, but they needed their own dedicated safe, which had to be in a cupboard and bolted to the floor or bolted to the wall or whatever within that cupboard. So again, that became complicated and long-winded. Booking system, that was actually a quick win because it's a web-based booking system. We'd already loaded that in COVID, so that wasn't an issue. So that was, and then I think just breaking down those barriers with staff, the registration staff, not our staff. We really wanted them in the buildings. But the team manager, the team members, they all wanted to come for look around. They wanted to see where the staff rooms were. They wanted to understand the parking, even though the parking was free and a lot more easier. So those kind of really building those relationships with those staff team members, we had to put an awful lot of work into that. One of the sites that, I think I've got my next slide. Oh, so where we are now. One of the sites, unbelievably, when we started to sort out the IT side of it, we realised that the building for some reason had been built with lots of steel in it. So actually, even getting the web technology in there was really, really difficult. So where we are now, so we've got it's only 1 day a week at the Priory Family Hub, which is in the west of the city. So that started in December last year. So we probably had conversations ongoing from April, May time. So that's how long it actually took to start one of the sessions up and running. And then we followed that with setting one up in the east as well. And that only started last month. That was the one with the walls of steel that it took an awful long time to sort the IT and sort the printer, etc. out. And now all the positive feedback started coming in from the staff and from the families. And they've approached us for a 2nd day a week at Priory. So that starts next week. So we will then have 2 full days at Priory and 1 full day at Long Hill. So getting down to some of the data. So this is the data just from Q4, so January to March, so only 3 months. So bearing in mind that would be the one hub for just those 3 months. So we had 213 people were attended that session, and 119 of those were adults. So the others would have been their own, either the babies or other older children who were bringing. There were some older children actually when we looked at the range of the children. And then the split of that was 24% male and 76% female. Which is really interesting. We had a brief chat earlier, didn't we, Chris, around national data versus this data. There isn't any data on whether they are married couples or not. And when I went to the central registration team and asked them around their data, they said that they don't keep that. It just goes into that national picture. So that data is from how whenever anybody comes into any activity or session in a family hub, we look it on our systems. And I think that some of the reasons for that difference is that because the boundaries in Hull are so tight, any of the women that give birth in East Riding all attend Hull Women and Children's Hospital, so they would register the birth within Hull. So a percentage of those, and I think when I looked at it, it was about 20% of those 119 adults were actually from the East Riding, not Hull people. So that will have an impact on the data as well. So yeah, I think it's interesting from that, point of view of the data, and I've shared this with the manager of the birth registration service and asked her to, that we have more conversations about how we start recording data more effectively, so we can
Heather, on that point, again, in preparing for this topic of birth registration, what I was led to understand from a paper that was admittedly written in 2007, but it was a paper that very much was looking to take the birth registration process out of a centralized space and move it into the children's centers. But what they were saying in terms of the sole registrations, i.e., the mothers, was that the sole registrant mothers were much more likely to be young. So under the 21% were under the age of 22. Much more likely to have income levels under 10,400, which I think back in 2007 was 60% lower than the median income for UK families. And 63% of them were known to smoke. So there was an overall picture of multiple challenges around that sole registrant mother. But of course, what they didn't have was a picture of the father, who one might assume was may have mirrored in some cases those dynamics. But of course, because the father wasn't known, we don't know what their needs were. But I suppose the overall picture is a kind of skew towards maybe more multiple and complex needs, and a child, an infant in the mix, who doesn't have a father on their birth registration. And equally, thinking about sort of the impact of the life course. I'm not saying that all sole registrant mothers are young mothers. Of course, I'm not saying that, nor am I saying that all young fathers are the partner of a sole registrant mother. That's not what I'm saying at all. But in the space of longevity, a young parent is going to be involved, all things being equal, in that child's life more than for much longer than a parent who has a first child at, say, 35 plus, because of course they're just that much younger. So actually, it would appear that wrapping around that family structure where there might be multiple and complex needs, one of those needs being age and youth and the challenges of that, the family hubs and bringing the registration process into the family hubs where there's guidance into a plethora of different supports and services. It all seems to make an awful lot of sense, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and everything you just said about that, those levels of deprivation and multiple complex needs. As I started with that first slide, if you're looking at the data for Hull, we're right at that top of all those huge range of complex needs. That we are seeing a very slight increase in teenage pregnancies at the moment as well. Historically, we had a teenage pregnancy support team, but again, with cuts that came in, in 2012, that service was one of the ones that was kind of merged and diluted down, really. I won't say it was disseminated. Well, it was disseminated. So I think bring that into the mix of some of those levels of everything you just talked about within Hull. We have as I mentioned in one of the previous slides, we have a targeted pregnancy support team, which some of the staff used to work in the teenage pregnancy support team, and they are working with often co-working family support with social care. A lot of those, some of the most complex pregnant families within the city, and they are actually based within the hubs. And on our kind of action plan moving forward, it's one of those is to ensure that those staff are really promoting this service in the hubs from those
Mhm.
and getting those more vulnerable families to use the hubs, because they're coming anyway to see those workers and the midwives and etc. But yeah, I would agree with. I've not read that paper, but if you wouldn't mind sending me that, Chris, that'd be really
Sure,
interesting.
no problem, no
And I
problem.
will. Yeah, interesting. Um,
Need to
yeah,
divert you again. I just
no. It's all good conversation, isn't it? So obviously, I mean, it goes without saying some of these the benefits to the families, but the majority of we have, I think it's about 95% of the families in Hull with a child under 2 are registered with the family hubs. So as we can see, most of them know where the family hubs are and how to access them. And we're doing with the Family Hub Start for Life funding, we're doing a whole range of initiatives at the moment to ensure that those families really understand how to access the hubs from conception right through to as the child grows and develops, etc. So lots of work going on around that as well to increase that visibility to all families, whether or not the mums, dads, people with English as second language, etc. Obviously, the needs, as I mentioned, the building in the Hull City Centre very difficult to access. Free parking, easy to walk. Most of the hubs that we've mentioned where the birth registration centre sessions are run are attached to schools and nurseries, and most of the family hubs are. So again, you've got that link in and that transition support when we're thinking about that priority of transition. It makes all that much easier. The staff support the families to work out which nursery that they want to go to, and that obviously usually links with the school as well. And we have a whole range of other support through the family hubs, obviously things like food banks, financial support, all those groups, activities, sessions, that one-to-one family support, everything that I've previously talked about, but there's a whole breadth of services there that can support families. Something we're working on at the moment, it was noted with it, it's an ask within the Family Hub Start for Life guidance is around your welcome criteria, which just basically means that the front of house reception staff all have badges with the names on and they're really trained to really clearly explain to staff when they come into the buildings what they can access there and what they can access on other sites, and so that real welcoming. Some of the feedback we've received from some of the families that have accessed some of the parenting sessions, specifically around the first 1,001 days and that really early work with parents, that they were so nervous and anxious about coming to a group by themselves or first time accessing some kind of a session. So real focus on trying to break down those barriers to support families to access come into the buildings, and big focus on that. So some of the feedback from the families so far, really positive. I mean, I don't need to read those to you. You can read them.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and one I put there that that the day wasn't right for them, but there's always going to be the case, isn't it? You're never going to get it. And we are now offering a second day at primary.
I mean, I put in the chat earlier that everything that you're sharing about the technicalities of moving a process of such as birth registration, it could be others as well, but from one location in a centralized space, which has the wraparound of all the local authority governance, and into the family hubs, which still has that wraparound, but there are technical challenges to doing that. I think it's so important to share details like this because, as I say in the chat, the idea I understand is that all these good practices can then be implemented into different geolocations so that the benefits of this can be spread out and reach others across the country. But actually, if we don't share this type of learning, then everybody's just starting from zero when it's that
Mhm.
that would seem a little bit nonsensical to me. So I think it's great. And I also I've kind of been laughing as you've been saying, talking about parking, because actually when we deliver the Future Dads course in hospitals, in a few hospitals in London, and we have this group of fathers who are expectant fathers. And when it comes to the Q&A session after we've done the bathing, winding, holding, talking about mental health and relationships and everything, question number one is almost always, where do I park?
Mhm.
Because it's a question of access, obviously. So I think Heather, I think it's great that you're sharing all this. Again,
And
sorry,
and I
I
think that causes
diverted.
just that one thing causes so much, or can cause so much anxiety for people, doesn't it? Especially if you've got a new baby that you don't know what you're doing. You don't even know how to get your baby in and out of the car seat properly. And I remember, myself when my daughter was a baby, those kind of things were so difficult when you're just trying to work out how to, do that early parenting
Yeah.
stuff. Um, yeah, it's and you forget that, don't you? You forget when you're just the service deliverer, but the service deliverer. But it's that level of detail that breaks down those barriers and makes things so much easier for
Mm,
families.
mm,
Um, so yeah, and then I was just going to talk a bit about the work that we is ramping up um, around supporting dads generally across the city, because I think this has ebbed and flowed over the years, and I think depending on the priorities, whole safeguarding teams, the ILACs under the ILACs framework were in special measures up to last year. Where are we? Yeah, last year. So I think the major focus for Hull, and we had a big turnover of senior management. We had a few different directors of children's services for a while, etc. So lots of turmoil over the years, and that's all settled down now, and we're out of the inadequate inspection framework, and we've got a stable leadership team. So it's, I think, now enabling that focus to be on um, work that we should have been doing anyway, really. But things take over, don't they? And the Family Hub Start Life funding has supported us to with the things like the training and access to the training and this peer support contract. So with the Family Hub Start for Life funding, we commissioned four peer support contracts, and one of those is particularly around supporting dads and partners. And Home Start Hull was successful in getting that contract. Obviously, the Family Hub Start for Life funding finishes March 25, and obviously we're all waiting for an election and see what's going to happen. So that was mobilised beginning of this year. So they are building and developing that. As part of that, they have a regular peer support group within a cafe, which is really busy, and they do a couple within the family hubs as well, which are increasing in busyness. They've done a podcast, which is Partners and Dads instead of podcast, which one links there, and the link to the second one is on that same page as well. And that's been really interesting because they started off with some of the male staff across the family hubs, because they were willing and accessible, and getting them to talk about their experiences of parenting and the support they received. And then we've set up a kind of a multi-agency working with Dad's Task and Finish group, um, really focusing on quick wins of how we would get to some of the dads across the city. I think in one of the big, we've got Hull City, if anybody knows the sports teams across Hull, we've got Hull FC and Hull KR, so opposing. One's east of the city and one's west of the city. So you're either a black and white or a red and white supporter, but worked with both those rugby teams and Hull FC. And I think on one of the major matches they had, adverts up on the screens, and so we've done quite a lot of work with the major sports teams, and the Institute of Health visiting perinatal mental health training for working with dads, and we've had two of the training sessions to date. I'll talk a bit about the work we're doing around that. So it sounds a bit basic having displays up around dad's mental health, but I guess there wasn't really that focus within the family hubs. And with the Family Hub Start for Life funding, we recruited some first 1,001 days family support workers, and they sit outside the antenatal clinics and support the dads. They sit outside the birth registration sessions and support dads, and just have those conversations with dads saying, did you know that all the support is available? And some of the feedback from the dads was, there's 2 quotes I put on there, that you're the first person to ask about me.
Mm.
Uh, and I didn't know this information and support was available. So that's one of the champions. Those first 1,000 days family support staff have become those champions, and they're kind of training the rest of the teams and embedding it and rolling it out across our teams, and also working closely with health visiting as well. We have a parent carer panel, which is an ask through the Family Hub's funding, and about 40% of the parents that are attending that are dads, so we're getting a really good representation of dads on there. The Healthy Holidays programme, all cities in the country have the Healthy Holidays programme, and we're seeing a lot of that is based around sports activities across the summer, so it very much appeals to dads and accessible. So getting a really high percentage of dads going with the children to those. And we do quite a few trips across the summer as well, out to the beach, etc. And again, that's always really well accessed by dads, and good feedback from the dads. We're starting dads infant massage sessions, and we used to do this many years ago and had a lot of the male workers trained up in the infant massage, and then with turnover of staff, etc., we've retrained trained again some of the male staff, male employees. And we run grow brain groups. I don't know if anyone's looked into grow brain, but it is we do grow brain baby and grow brain toddler, which is really around that brain development and understanding the serve and return, and that whole conversation between right from, well, actually it's not from birth, it's antenatally, and we're getting a lot of high percentage of dads attending that as well. What I haven't put on there is we're doing VIG, so video interactive guidance work as well, that comes through the Family Hub's funding. And I've just had the meeting I had before this meeting, was an update with the staff that are doing that. We've got 2 staff in the health visiting team and 2 in the Family Hub's teams that are doing that training. And they've currently worked with, I think, 4 families, I think 1 family each, and 2 of those had the dads there. And they talked about, one of the staff talked about this dad, that the baby had a brittle bone disease, and so dad hadn't picked baby up at all. And really powerful work around how that video interactive guidance, support and feedback. I mean, I don't know if anybody has looked at the VIG work or has used it at all, but it's really about that positive parenting, and they film them, then sit and feedback, show the video back, and show that really positive interaction, and really nurturing, supportive work. So we're seeing the starting some really positive work there with both parents and with dads. So that's all exciting stuff. Again, that is all linked with the Family Hub Start for Life funding, so really important that we are able to continue that afterwards. Just some bits about the training, which I'm sure you're all fully aware of, but we've done the Becoming Dads training. That was through the Home Start Hull peer support contract, and that is now starting, so offering those antenatal groups with dads, so that we're giving that information and support right from pregnancy right the way through, working closely with maternity services. We have a carousel event, which is kind of an open access antenatal session that we hold at Hull Women and Children's Hospital, and it's kind of like a partnership event that all families, pregnant people, are invited to. We get quite a high number of dads to those events, but work really closely with maternity services for that antenatal offer, and the antenatal sessions are all delivered out of the Family Hubs. And then the fathers, and as I talked about, that Institute of Health Visiting, fathers perinatal and mental health training, and we've now set up the champion role across all the Family Hubs and across the health visiting service, and really trying to, I suppose, tackle some of those conversations and ensure that this is everybody's business. I guess what we say in early help is that everything's everybody's business, but really embedding that champion role and ensuring that people keep it at the top of their list of conversations with families. And I guess really, if you're thinking about going to the other end of the spectrum of complex support and targeted family support, one of the underpinning. I was at an event run by the Department of Health and Social Care last week around the new changes to working together, and really thinking about that family network and really focusing on that support that's available. Where is dad? What, has dad received exactly the same information that mum has? Is dad involved in that family plan? Really embedding it right from the earliest point, so that it's not scrabbling around at last minute when families get to a really complex tipping point. So lots of work going on across that whole threshold of support, really focusing on the support of dads, and that dad's mental health is supported and acknowledged, and the given the right information and support, and where to access more complex support. I think that was me.
Wow. Heather, the first thing I want to say is that it's incredible that you are across all of these different, I mean, really, if you ever wanted to career pivot, there's always the one man band on the high street, that kind of thing. That's really incredible. So I just want to acknowledge that first of all.
I've
And
lost
then
some. I don't know how to unshare anymore.
if you go to share screen at the bottom, I think you can just cancel out of that. But then I wanted there's a lot of activity going on in the comments section, but let me highlight a few of the questions. So Catherine Barker, who's had to leave, she said, very impressive outcome for Start for Life around breastfeeding by Hull. Do you think you can sustain the 4 mentors longer?
Well, that'd be interesting. That's a conversation we have a lot. We are also going through the UNICEF Gold Award process. Sorry, am I sharing? Stop share. There we go.
There you go. Yeah.
There we go. That's it. Yeah. So lots of work around that. Sorry, repeat that question. Was it around
So
the longevity of the infant feeding rates?
that's right. Yes, it's
Yeah.
around can you sustain the 4 mentors longer term?
Yes. Yeah, lots of work going on around that as well. We're going through the UNICEF Going for Gold. It's been really interesting that there was lots of conversations around how we support that within our elected members, about how we support people that choose not to breastfeed as well. And so we've had to do an awful lot of work with our elected members around actually why this is a priority for Hull. And I think that's been really useful, because it is raised it up on that higher, it's all those positive disruptors that you have to acknowledge at times, isn't it? But yeah, so it's raised it up politically and strategically a lot higher up on the agenda. And yeah, lots of external work, which I could talk about for about 3 hours, or wider work that I could talk about for about 3 hours. We're doing a milk trail across the city. We are really supporting, working with some of the big employers in Hull, such as we've got Reckitt's, Smith and Nephew, Arco, making sure that they are offering that longer term support for people women when they go back to work. And that's one of the big drop off points, is when women go back to work. Support for dads, so that dads understand the benefits of infant feeding or breastfeeding in the short term and the longer term. So yeah, I think it will be a watch this space, but hopefully it will continue to show good progress.
Well, I think the question really is about sustainability, whether it's of a mentor program or Family Hub Start for Life as an entire agenda. And I think that Owen puts it very succinctly, where he says such a rich case study of how Family Hub should be implemented. This, alongside the desire to do more with dads, is a great example to be shared with the wider Family Hubs network. Let's hope we can build on these foundations and not lose it all at the end of the financial year. And it's the question of sustainability is so multivariable, because, and especially in the light of a soon to be held, but we don't know when, general election, because the priorities will change depending upon those outcomes. But
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, I didn't mention at the beginning, it wasn't one of the slides, but I didn't mention around we are one of the trailblazer. What that actually
yeah,
meant was we were thinking, oh, this is great, we're going to get a big extra lump of money and we're going to have time to blaze some trails. In reality, we got not very much, and we got it the same time as received the rest of the funding, and then we're expected to demonstrate outcomes very, 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 very quickly. But that's fine, it is what it is. But a part of that learning is that we are linked in with that wider network across the country, and we meet with all the other trailblazers regularly. And when Andrea Ledson was in her previous role, we met with Andrea Ledson regularly. I'm at a meeting on Thursday around the Yorkshire and Humber. There's ourselves and Sheffield at the Trailblazers in Yorkshire and Humber. So we have to share good practice. And I do think because Hull, when the cuts came in, back when the government came in, Hull we did have 22 family hubs. A lot of areas lost all of them. We were really adamant that we needed to keep some up. And so we'd got down to 8 really. But that has given us a really strong basis, and they were all those original show start buildings. And but yeah, that wider sustainability for the whole program is interesting. What we've tried to do is the whole training and development program for staff. We've tried to embed it across the whole partnership, so it's not just staff that we've recruited. A lot of the staff were recruited internally when we did recruit staff. So, and we give them a 2-year contract, and so if we don't get the funding, they will go back to their substantive posts. So we will keep that knowledge and that history. But yeah, it is a big problem for early help services across the country, because it's not just the family hubs. For example, the drug and alcohol program and their funding, that all comes. A lot of it is that short-term funding, isn't it, up to March 25. So there's a huge percentage of the early help funding across Hull comes to her. We keep talking about this cliff edge and keep raising it and shouting about it, but a lot of the services drop off the cliff edge at that point.
it's
Yes.
firstly, I want to say that I totally acknowledge the idea that you're giving funding to produce robust outcomes, often with a number attached to it, and then you're given a very short window to achieve those. Owen, you've got your hand raised.
Thanks so much, Heather. I said it already, my question was without, but I think it's a really great kind of demonstration for someone who's managing services that are being embedded or commissioned by Start for Life or family hubs in different boroughs in London. It's a very different geographical context. But I've been doing this work supporting fathers originally under a teenage pregnancy strand many years ago. So Hull was always well up on my agenda in terms of the work that you were doing. That unfortunately you referenced earlier. I was listening in transit that you said unfortunately has been disbanded or kind of merged within wider teams. In other areas I've heard said that means basically you've lost that team or its expertise, because unless you keep that uniqueness, you kind of lose the focus on the specialist needs of that cohort. But I just think in terms of fathers' approaches to younger parents, addressing poverty, which I guess is a wider issue in somewhere like Hull and maybe in some of the London boroughs where we've got pockets of it, but it's very much cheek by jowl with huge wealth. Let's not beat around the bush about it, right? So my question really out of all of that long preamble is about the delineation or the separation of the different strands within family hubs. Are they competing? Do you feel like, Start for Life 0 to 2, so you're only working with those, but actually family hubs is 0 to 18 or to 25 with additionality, and families don't care about any of those kind of things. They think, well, I've got a 2-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 11-year-old. Just give me some help.
Yeah, no, I think because my line manager oversees that whole breadth of age range, that helps. And she's very, very good at doing that whole strategic linking the whole partnership together. And my work, as I said, my job title, Integrative Services Manager, I work really closely with that whole breadth of services. What we've done again, she's very good at doing the whole horizon scanning. She could see that this funding was coming. We already
Yeah.
did some background work. We got in an organisation to do some, I suppose, pre-work, looking at what the first 1,001 days offer was. We'd already set up a first 1,001 days steering group before, and then we set up subgroups under the first 1,001 days steering group. So I chair the infant mental health subgroup. So I think how the structure is set up across the city supports that, and I think I work really, really closely with my counterpart Damon, who manages all the youth services, and then, like I said, youth justice, we even work really closely. Got a really excellent project running at the moment within the youth justice team around speech and language, because when we looked at something like 95% of the young people involved in the youth justice service had really severe speech and language issues. So we commissioned the speech and language team to come in and doing some really amazing work with that cohort of children. You know, and we know those issues around speech and language lead to, you know, a whole range of other issues. Some really amazing focus work going on there, which again is primarily with young boy or lads, mainly. So yeah, we try our hardest to not let it become siloed. Interestingly, I think one of the most difficult silos to unpick, which will change as the changes come to working together, is that work with social care. I work so closely with my social care colleagues, but still, you know, that delineate
step up and step down.
Honestly, I was at a panel. We now have a step up panel because we weren't allowed to just step up cases because they were saying we were getting, you know, thresholds wrong, which I would debate. But anyway, so that work, but that will become more close knitted as we're looking at the changes that are coming to working together and what that will. We haven't unpicked it we're waiting for the Pathfinders. I'm sure everybody is Pathfinder outcomes. But that's a really interesting time, isn't it, as to what's going to happen around that work.
Because social care is another big area, and this idea that if we're not integrating social care to the services that they step down or rely on to actually do the work with the service users once they've done an assessment, because I don't know what it's like in Hull, but often in other places we feel like the pressure on the system is so great that they're almost becoming only an assessment or risk assessment service, make recommendations, and then who actually does the work with the families? It's not the social workers themselves, they don't have the capacity. So if there's a blockage or there's a kind of like you're butting heads up against the services you need to rely on, it's only the families that suffer. And particularly in relation to fathers and men, if all those services are seeing these men, you know, you were very frank and forthright at the beginning about the scale of the problem in Hull around domestic abuse, which I guess goes hand in hand off the back of COVID and the cost of living crisis and everything we know historically. Abusive situations rise under those kind of challenging times more broadly in society. Substance misuse, you mentioned as well, alcohol. If we are not looking at, we've been lucky enough to be involved in a couple of projects. I don't know if Hull were involved as well with research and practice, redesigning domestic abuse responses, trying to just change the way that we work, because over the last 30 years, let alone your own particular local issues, we've not seen the outcomes we want from domestic abuse. So including men, seeing men as human beings rather than just the risk that they pose, whilst keeping victims of abuse safe in the first instance. But you know, turning that around, offering help, offering safe decouplings or separations of families where everyone's observed through the process and not just leaving men on the periphery is clearly the way forward. So that connection between social care, family hub, family early help need to be more integrated in my view. And I hope that the new reviews of social care that will come in after the general election kind of see that as well. You know, I think it's key. But boroughs, you know, boroughs or city councils like yours are great examples for me of how these kind of big set piece fundings should be working. We should be seeing case studies every kind of month about this is an example of how you integrate a service. This is an example of how you include men within an offer, even though, you know, you don't have to be perfect straight away. Working towards is the way to go.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said, Owen. It's good to know that other other areas have the same challenges.
God.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're not doing half as well as you in some of them, let me tell you.
Well, I think it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? I'm sure there's areas that, well, we all have challenges with. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, on that note, I'm going to call time on this. It's because clearly we could go on and on. I do want to acknowledge, Jess, your question about language in reference to dad and father. However, I'm going to, with your consent, use that to create some social media discussion around that through content share, because I think we're often guided towards how important language is. And if we're going to acknowledge that, then it's also very important to use terms like father and dad in terms of speaking to a group of people. So I will use that under that guise and see what we can foster as a conversation there. Thank you. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing such tremendous work, and also not shying away from the challenges. I think there's often a sentiment that, oh, I have to present everything as being quite rosy, but actually hearing the challenges of the machinery around this type of work, and also acknowledging that, prior to COVID, there wasn't the appetite. Then there was a response, and then there was a kickback, and then there was like, wait a minute, this isn't working as well. I can imagine the frustrations within Hull City Council, and particularly those who see the progressiveness of distribution of birth registration and other family support services. I just, I suppose I'm thanking you on behalf of many for just sticking with it, because that's not easy. It's very easy to say,
I would say I've got
I'll do something else.
I've got very good admin support, and it was the admin support that actually were there every step of the way, drilling away at it. I just unblocked some of the blockages along the way, but they were the ones that were doing it day to day, who was the stalwarts that just kept at it, bless them.
Unbelievable.
Well, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And details of the next one will come out and be shared through the mailing list and on social media. So thank you.
Thanks all. Well done. Brilliant example.